I found this absolutely extraordinary. Harry, Meghan, and Oprah, that interview that we've spoken about so much and contains so much fiction, has ended up being nominated for an Emmy for Best Non-Fiction Series. Oh, the irony, Megyn, the irony.
It's absurd. And you know, let's say these nominations came out the day after the interview. Maybe you give them a pass. The Emmys, they didn't have a chance. BS. Because now we know that not only did Meghan Markle tell a bunch of whoppers in that interview, but that night during the interview, Dan, I was tweeting out, I wanted more follow-ups. Why didn't she ask who in the royal family, for example, was jealous of Kate after the Australia tour? Who or was jealous of Meghan? Who in the royal family said the thing about skin color? Get specific. If she doesn't want to answer, ask 2 or 3 follow-up questions. That's a huge allegation. And even her saying that she was married, 3 days before she had the actual wedding, Oprah had time between the interview and the day it aired. They spent days and days editing that piece. As a journalist, you can find out. You call the Archbishop. You can ask questions and get real answers and include in your report, we went to the Archbishop and asked, and this is what we found. That wasn't quite true. None of that was done. This is about celebrity and trying to celebrate, these 2 women who are women of color, speaking their truth, even though it wasn't actual truth. We're supposed to be with a lived experience, even if it bears no relation to actual reality, and celebrate them. And if you're not pro all of that, Dan, you're a racist, sexist pig. So vote for someone else.
Oh my goodness, I would love to see Megyn Kelly versus Meghan Markle. That's where it would be at. It would be fascinating, Megyn.
People don't seem to understand that if you get vaccinated, you do that for you. That's what protects you. You don't have to continue controlling everyone else's behavior. And over here, as I know sometimes over there, we seem to be pretending in the more blue-leaning states that somehow the masks are the normal, or that the default is the mask. The default is a skin-showing face. That's what's normal. People seem to have forgotten it because there are a lot of people who want to lean into their COVID fear. And the rest of us want to get back to normal. You do you, but it's time for the others who are really afraid of this thing to stop trying to control the rest of us. We did our part.
Absolutely fascinating this week with Brett Weinstein, who of course is from he's I guess a very controversial dude in the US who has garnered a huge social media following around the world because of some of the research that he's done into COVID theories that maybe go against what a lot of the mainstream scientists and the mainstream media will tell you. But he now has been essentially demonetized by YouTube because of some comments that he's made about ivermectin, which is quite a controversial potential treatment of COVID, which has been trialed by scientists around the world. But so far, it doesn't seem like there's any hard and fast evidence that it does help treat COVID, although the jury is still out. So what did you make of him and what do you make of the story?
So Brett, I should say, has been ahead of the curve on a lot of his COVID predictions. I mean, he was one of the ones a year ago who was saying this, it looks like this came from a lab leak.
Yep.
And, people dismissed him as a quack. And now that's the leading theory on how this thing got out, that it was a lab leak. So he's got a pretty decent history. And there's a longer list of things he's been right on. But he got in trouble with YouTube for this conversation he had about ivermectin. And there have been studies saying ivermectin is showing some very promising initial results when it comes to the treatment of COVID. And Brett would say prevention of COVID as well, less data there. And YouTube basically demonetized the episode and threatened him on that if he didn't be more responsible in his rhetoric. Then he went out and had a long conversation about vaccines and questioned those. And before you knew it, they had demonetized the entire channel. He has 2 of them. And he says in so doing, YouTube wiped out 1/2 of his family income. Now, I took a hard look at it, Dan, as a journalist. I'm not a scientist. I took a hard look at what's out there so far. And I gave him a hard time on the podcast because I don't think he handled it as well as he could have. I thought he should have had somebody representing the other side on who could have argued with the doctors who were taking his positions. Instead, he had 3 versus no one. I understand it's a counterweight to the mainstream narrative, but I just think as an audience member, I would have benefited more if I heard point, counterpoint, point, counterpoint. He owned that. And I do think on ivermectin, maybe he's overstating how amazing we know it may be. There's still a question. And the tests are ongoing. They are doing clinical trials on it right now. It's a drug they give to horses. It prevents lice, parasites. It can help with rosacea. But some morons are taking their horses ivermectin, right? It's like people are stupid. And somebody hears, oh, ivermectin, I just gave that to the horse last week, honey. And then they think they've got the cure. And before you know it, they're dead. So you do have to remember that there are dumb people everywhere and they're listening. So that is a responsibility as a broadcaster. As a journalist, you know not to do that. As somebody who comes from academia, he may be a little bit more freewheeling. So I kind of see both sides. YouTube does need to be responsible in what it puts out there. But I think they overcorrect and they crack down on conversation that's in any way controversial about COVID, about Trump and the election and so on in a way that treats us like infants. And that's problematic too.
Now, Caitlyn Jenner, obviously a member of the Kardashian clan, huge name recognition. How do you think she'll go?
I don't know. She's had a bit of a rocky start. I think Republicans generally like Caitlyn, but, she's a Republican. That was the biggest coming out she had. Forget being trans. And when she admitted she was a Republican, that's really where she fell apart with the left. She's kind of fallen down. She admitted she didn't even vote in the presidential election, and there were some important California ballot initiatives on there, which she didn't even seem to know existed. And they were big ones, like should we be able to discriminate against on the basis of race? Ultimately, California voters said no, we should not. But she didn't know about it, so she's had some stumbles, and she hasn't made much of a splash, and she's. Notwithstanding the fact that, of course, everybody, once knew her as Bruce and she's part of the Kardashian clan and all that stuff, she hasn't made much of a splash. And so we'll see. I don't know. I think within Republican circles, Larry's probably more beloved.
Yes, we'll see if Kim Kardashian or her ex-husband Kanye West endorse Caitlyn. That could help.
That could. You never know. We'll see. I still have my questions about California, which is a very blue state, which has had Republican governors in the past, is going to recall this governor. If you look at him on paper, he's straight out of Central Casting, former mayor of San Francisco.
It worked for Arnold Schwarzenegger, didn't it? So maybe it could work for Caitlyn Jenner. But first, Megyn, your podcast went a little bit viral this week after you said the media represented the events at the Capitol on January the 6th as so much worse than it actually was. Now, as ever, I thought it was a measured and nuanced argument from you, but the response to your comments, maybe not so much.
Yeah, well, that's true, and nothing unusual, right? It's like, for some reason, Dan, you tell me there's something about me that really tweaks mainstream media, especially here in the States. I think it's because they really, really want me to be on their side. And I'm not on their side. I'm on the side of the truth, which they find very irritating. They loved it when it, resulted in a very tough question to President Trump at a debate, or then Donald Trump at a debate. But they don't like it when it counteracts their narrative. And the truth is, they have been overplaying the story of January 6th. And I have, from the beginning, condemned what happened on Capitol Hill. I thought it was disgusting. It was upsetting. I do not carry any water for the people who went into that Capitol and committed crimes that day. However, the media has been breathlessly overplaying it since day one. And I give you as one primary example, the case of Officer Brian Sicknick. Brian Sicknick, we were told by the New York Times right after this happened, a couple days after, who did die a couple days after this happened. They told us that he died as a result of injuries sustained in fighting Trump supporters who bashed him with a fire extinguisher. It wasn't true. And even on the day the Times reported it, KHOU in Houston was reporting having spoken with a Capitol Police Union head on the record that he had died of a stroke. They ignored it. A month later, and by the way, in the meantime, everyone ran with the Times' reporting. Everyone. They breathlessly touted it. Why? Because it made the Trump supporters look like violent murderers, there to unleash an insurrection, part of their narrative. A month later, the New York Times gets part of the story corrected. They don't announce a retraction. They don't announce a correction even. They take down the part about the fire extinguisher, but maintain he was killed and then succumbed to his injuries. He wasn't killed. He wasn't. He had a stroke 2 days after the act on January 6th. But they wouldn't come to grips with it because, again, it undermined the narrative. And even then, CNN said, well, it was bear spray. He was sprayed with bear spray, which may have caused the stroke. Not true. Once again, the narrative fell apart. No one owns these mistakes, right? They wanted, when it was pepper spray. No, it wasn't. It was a stroke, okay? Now, it doesn't make it any better what happened on Capitol Hill that day, but there's no reason to keep overplaying your hand. And they did it time and time again. Glenn Greenwald, great reporter here, reported about Eric Munchell. They referred to him as zip tie man. And from Reuters, I think it was Washington Post, they issued reports saying he carried these zip ties into the Capitol with the intent of tying up lawmakers. Untrue. If you follow the case of this guy, his own prosecutors went into court and said, that's not true. He actually picked up the zip ties off of a table when he was in the Capitol, and it was pretty clear he didn't want the police to use them to handcuff protesters. But this was not part of some pre-planned plot to go in there and tie up lawmakers. Why does the media keep overplaying these stories? Because they like the narrative that condemns Trump supporters, that condemns Trump, that keeps him silent, that helps prevent him from trying to throw his hat into the ring in 2024. There are all sorts of reasons. But I think you can have a truth-based assessment of what happened that day. That it wasn't quite as bad as the media made it out to be.
Indeed.
It was not necessarily some huge insurrection. It was awful, but let's lower the temperature and be honest, especially when we've made repeated mistakes that always go against one side.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.